In this video, we're going to review the design of your chart of accounts, which includes funds, GL accounts, the so-called natural account, as well as dimensions. Just to give you an idea of how the pieces will come together for a purpose of transactions, if I just go look at my demo journal entry, you'll notice here I'm entering against a GL account 8310, which is my travel account in my natural account, against fund number one, and I can have many funds set up in the system, and this is where our system will automatically balance transactions between funds. And then on each line, I can add one or more dimensions. In my demo system, I have 5 dimensions assigned to the general ledger: department, program, event, region, and location. And behind each of these, there's a lookup field of values that you would define. Just to give you a sense for what we were considering doing for your setup, your dimension candidates probably would be things like department, Monday, project, region, zone, and behind each of these we would have values defined. So behind Monday we have Chicago, Houston, Los Angeles, Miami, and again you decide what these codes and names are going to be. And once you have those defined, they'll all come together for the purpose of entering a transaction. A dimension does not always have to be filled in, so if event is not applicable, you can skip it. These are all logical, relational chart of accounts in terms of data categorization, and you only need to enter what you actually care about. To control these dimension entries, you can set up validation rules in the system. So here, for example, is a validation rule that says we must enter certain dimensions. So what we're saying here is for all GL accounts that begin with the number 8, we must have a department code and we must have a program code. Again, as I mentioned before, you'll get to learn these filters. This basically says not equal null, not equal null. If I look at another validation rule, this is saying that if my general ledger account is 8310, then my department code must begin with the letter A. You can have multiple criteria here. So you could say department code must be this. In my scenario, event code must be something else, so on and so forth. I'm not going to be able to save this because I did not disable it before editing. So I'm just going to bail out the change so I don't accidentally mess up a rule that I already have specified. Okay, so we talked about dimensions, funds, and chart of accounts, where these come together. It's in your general ledger structure. This is your natural account structure, which we've talked about in a previous video. You would go from your assets down to your expenses and have typically 4, 5, or 6 numeric digits here. And again, that's subject to your preference in design. You'll notice here in the chart of accounts, we incorporate multiple types of transactions. Budget transactions, commitments come from requisitions, encumbrances come from purchase orders. So you're always able to calculate how much money is actually available to spend, and that'll be used in budget rules later on. However, in this topic, we wanted to cover how you would have the flexibility. So let's go take a look at where my dimensions are set up. It's under the administration menu, look at dimensions, and this is my demo system. So over a period of time, I've created dimensions for multiple scenarios for different customers. So each of these would have certain values. So take something real obvious like countries. If I have a country dimension because our organization feels we need to reflect those, then we can go ahead and set up those values. When we can, obviously, use the well-known conventions, makes sense. However, in some cases, things may not make sense. So for example, at departments, my values are, my sort of different admin departments, etc. So if I just go to the bottom, admin, default, development, so on. So those are the ways typically we'd look to set up those dimensions in the system. Okay, so this is all related to sub-accounts, chart of accounts, flexibility, etc. each of these values that we have defined here, let's go pick something else that might be relevant. Let's say we do something like a program code and look at these values. The dimension value code is 20 characters alphanumeric. Typically, we try and design something rational and sensible, and then the names would be pulled out for reporting purposes. So in this video, I just wanted to cover chart of accounts flexibility. We had several topics and questions on how we set up uh, ways to categorize data. Why this matters, of course, is when we get to doing reporting in the system. So for example, if we go look at general ledger entries, notice here I've got lots of data sitting in the system from beginning time onwards, but the ability to come in and then start filtering this data. So I could say, for example, I want to see everything that's a certain fund number. So let's go and put in fund one. And this data is being filtered down. I could then also say, let me go see data for a particular department or program or project in the system. So there's all these data values that I can choose to filter on. So this is one of my dimensions. And if I look down here, I'm going to pick my dimension admin, or this is one of those filtering decisions again, or IT. And you can enter anything you choose to in combinations. And when I tab off that field, now I'm only seeing data that matches those criteria. I could then sort this data to get an eyeball. I could maybe further narrow it down. So let's say we spotted a possible culprit that might be a problem for us. I can go ahead and say filter to this value. And now I'm seeing only the transactions for that purchase invoice in the system. And customers love doing this. Then you can use that data, open in Excel, and you extract just that data that you filter down and narrow down and dump into Excel. And here you can do further analysis as you see fit. All right, so we covered, sorry, this was the topics we're trying to run through here. Let me just go back here. Hopefully you get a good feel for the flexibility in the system. When we go sit down and start planning, we'll work backwards from your reports, because when we do reports in the system, so let's say I want to do a statement of activities and I want to go ahead and process this statement of activities. I can pick a certain date range in the system. Everything is date-based in the system. There's no buckets or anything like that. I can report against days, weeks, anything I choose, any range of data. But I'm just going to go back to 2016, where I have most of my data. Notice this is the standard statement of accounts layout. I can then change the layout. So let's say I wanted to see everything by department. I can choose a column layout that says by department. And the way these are set up now, I'm seeing all my columns out there. Let's pick something that's not quite as wide. Let's pick by programs. Well, actually, no, let's do this. My favorite one is by fiscal month. Because typically when I've, most of the companies I've ever run, I've always run business and being able to do work based on looking at trends across months in the system. Anywhere we see a number, I can drill down on and drill back to my budget, drill back to my actuals, and so on. So all that flexibility for setting up your chart of accounts and dimensions really comes into play in terms of your ability to online interrogate and retrieve data, as well as run reports in the system.